So I highly recommend everybody check out the Bernie Blackout documentary. It's on Vice, and what they did is they described how mainstream media has an anti-Bernie bias, and to my surprise, the documentary was pretty well done. I think they make a pretty strong case. There's a lot of prominent lefty media people who are kind of featured in it. They only used like a 3-second clip of me. And I was semi-butthurt by that. Not butthurt by the fact that they used the clip, butthurt by the fact that they didn't use more. I was like, really? I was one of the louder, pro-Bernie voices in media. But they had a lot of people from Chapo Trap House. I love the people from Chapo Trap House. I think that podcast is great. They had Crystal from The Hill. They had a lot of Jimmy Dore, which is actually interesting because he wasn't a Bernie supporter this time around. He was a Tulsi supporter, but they took a bunch of little things that he said and put him in there. And really not that much of me. Slightly butthurt. But anyway, so they made a strong case that, yes, there was a giant bias against Bernie in the mainstream media, and there's a moment in the documentary that I wanted to share with you. This is what I view as proof as to how MSNBC is really just corporate Democrat propaganda. This goes beyond just evidence. This is like, it was barely hidden, almost not hidden at all. And this actually involves our friend Crystal Ball from Rising. So let's take a look at a story from when she was there. Watch this.
When I was at MSNBC, I saw what many people saw early on, before the primary had even started on the Democratic side, that Hillary Clinton would be a bad candidate.
So though I admire and respect Secretary Clinton deeply, I must say, don't run, Hillary, don't run. But afterwards, the Clinton people called and complained to the MSNBC top brass and threatened not to provide any access during the upcoming campaign.
I was called in by my boss who said, that was fine, but anything else that you do on Hillary Clinton needs to be submitted to the president of the network.
Now, being a human interested in maintaining my job, I'm certain I did less critical Clinton commentary after that than I maybe otherwise would have.
Mainstream media has a boss.
Crystal Ball, when she was on MSNBC, criticized Hillary Clinton. Hillary's people called the president of MSNBC and said, hey, nice segment you got there. Anyway, it'd be a shame if you got zero access to Hillary when she runs. So then the president of MSNBC spoke to Crystal Ball and said, listen, all right, it's fine what you did. It's fine what you did. But if you want to do anything else critical of Hillary Clinton, you got to run it through management first. Because management wanted to maintain that access with the Clintons. I've never seen a more clear example of and here's the point, guys. This goes beyond Chomsky's manufacturing consent thesis. See, the idea of that is corporations really reflect the will of the government and the elites, maybe even more than state media does, because they're all part of the same elite class. And really, the control happens in the hiring process, where you have the only people who get to the top of that profession are people who are so thoroughly pre-vetted that management knows these people are not going to rock the boat. There's a reason why Chuck Todd has such a prominent job as the host of Meet the Press. There's a reason why Wolf Blitzer is on CNN for about 1,000 hours a day. Because they know, we got to go with the safe people who are not going to question power and authority. They're not going to question the establishment. They're not going to rock the boat. So you get this picture of the world that's painted, which reflects the will of the elites and the establishment. That's the idea of manufacturing consent. What this story with Crystal shows us is that sometimes it even goes beyond just that. It even goes beyond a situation where you don't need direct interference in order to get the host to do your bidding. In some instances, they literally also do the direct interference, which is what we're hearing in this story, which is wild, bro. Now, don't get it twisted. Don't get it twisted. Every time I beat up on MSNBC and CNN, I feel compelled to let everybody know Fox works the exact same way with the Republicans. Exact same way. Don't get it twisted. They're not holier than thou. They're not better. None of that. No. In the same way that MSNBC is the propaganda arm of the corporate Democrats, Fox News is the propaganda arm of the corporate Republicans. So that's just the nature of the beast. That's just how it works. So they're not off the hook. But in the case of MSNBC, a lot of people early on had hoped that they'd be better. That, hey, maybe this would be a network that actually represents left interests. It doesn't. It only represents corporate democratic interests. And as we all know, corporate democratic interests almost never line up with the left. Maybe every now and then they sprinkle in some agreement on social issues like gay marriage, for example. But when it comes to economic stuff, you're never going to get them really questioning stuff in the way that they should. Now, this story from Crystal is one thing, but there's even more evidence, man. Like, I consider this proof from Crystal here. This story is out of this world, and it really shows you how dirty this game is. But Ed Schultz tells a story in this documentary, and it's something that we actually covered on this show before, because the news broke a couple years ago. But the late, great Ed Schultz, rest in peace, he was blocked from covering Bernie's announcement. When Bernie announced that he was running for president, they had this whole thing planned where they announce it on Ed Schultz's show, and, you know, they have a big interview and everything, and apparently the president of MSNBC called Ed Schultz at the last minute and said, "You are not covering this. You are not covering this." And so they wanted to block Ed Schultz from covering the launch of a campaign for president of a U.S. senator. Guys, they can ignore Bernie when he's been in Washington, D.C. for about 1,000 years. He was a congressman. He was a senator. Before all that, he was a mayor in Burlington, Vermont. A guy who's very well established, who's going to run for president, and they still tried to ignore him. They still tried to block him out. This was their philosophy, their approach, their way of defeating the insurgent left is they ignore you as much as they possibly can. You know, you can't gain that big of a following if you're never shown the light of day. It requires anti-establishment, independent new media outlets like this one to even show you guys what's happening with people like Bernie, because he was a real threat to them. He actually would change stuff. And so MSNBC said, nope. They were doing the bidding of the Clintons back then as well. And then, of course, there's the famous story of Cenk Uygur, who worked at MSNBC, and I forget the years. I want to say it was like 2010 and 2011, maybe. But he was tough on Obama, because at the time, Obama was doing many things that were pretty conservative and pretty pro-establishment. And so Cenk called it out multiple times, and he was called into the office of the president, and the president said, president of MSNBC, and the president says, "Hey man, I know like you want to be an outsider, and outsiders are cool and stuff, but we're insiders. And I was told by my friends in Washington that maybe you should reel it in a little bit." And Cenk says that he was floored by that. He was like, what? What? So he actually got like a speech. He got the speech on easy, buddy. Easy, buddy. Don't go too hard in the paint, or else it's not going to be accepted. So that's 3 stories right there from 3 sources I trust. Crystal Ball, Ed Schultz, Cenk Uygur. All 3 of them had a very similar experience where they were like, yeah, they flat out, it wasn't even like subtle controls like you would expect in the manufacturing consent dynamic of how things work. It was just outright like, you're crossing a line, not okay, reel it in, we carry water for these people. That's wild, man. That's wild. And the most sad, depressing thing about all this is older voters still trust these networks. Older Democrats still trust MSNBC and CNN. And that, in part, explains the giant divide between the younger voters, who 80% went for Bernie, millennial and even Generation X, tremendously high numbers went for Bernie, a very high percentage went for Bernie. It's because those people are more likely to what? Get their news online. Get their news from outlets like this or certain websites that they like. Whereas The older voters, they'll sit back and watch CNN and MSNBC, and they think they're getting the straight dope from these people. They think they're getting the real news. And so they have no idea about all this dirtiness behind the scenes and how politics is playing in it, and they're not telling you the truth, and they're not being honest. So it's a shame because in many ways, corporate media is still king, and they are absolutely controlling the narrative, whereas outlets like this are still, unfortunately, just responding to it.